Okay. Mhm. Okay, and so now welcome, Fadi and Nevine. This book is very beautiful, and I'm very excited. So if everybody could actually mute, if you could mute your microphones, and Nevine, take it away.
So thank you so much for this introduction. It is a privilege to actually be part of this discussion of Fadi's book. We've been waiting for it for a long time. So excited to talk about it because there's so much that Fadi put into this book. Just want to say quickly that Carnegie Mellon, I'm an assistant professor in Carnegie Mellon University, and our relationship with Fadi goes back to, I think, 2021. Fadi spoke to our classes many times, as part of students' education, learning about Palestinian heritage. We also last year had a chance to take 11 students, my colleague who is attending actually here, Michal, under Police. But we and Ralph, a third professor from Carnegie Mellon, we went to Israel and Palestine, and Fadi accompanied us in Jerusalem and all through different cities in Palestine. It was just an amazing experience for our students and for us. And just holding the book and browsing through the pages and flipping through the beautiful stories just hits, all those memories. So it's really a privilege to talk about that today. So Fadi, I really enjoyed flipping through the book. I think people are here to listen to you, not to me. So the first thing, it is a book about recipes, but there's a lot more than that, right? So let's just start with the recipes and your choice of Palestinian cuisine as sharing that heritage that you choose to include in your book. Your take on Palestinian dishes is unique. And we experienced that in Archestratus last year in Aqab in London. Tell us about Palestinian cuisine that you chose to share and what you wanted to convey through the recipes in your book.
Thank you. Well, Paige, thank you for giving us that space. It means a lot. And Nevine, thank you for accepting to play this game. I know it's not easy. It means a lot to me to be here today. And Nevine, the recipes, I wanted Palestinian food to be accessible. I tried in the book to have recipes that follow the seasons, because our cuisine is very seasonal, but also recipes that are accessible to everybody. I mean, the simplest recipe in the book is one I'm extremely proud of, because the result is great. You take a fig, you cut it in four, put some olive oil and some sumac on top, and there you go. And I mean, it's just, if you haven't tried it, well, wait a couple of months until the real figs arrive. But it's fabulous. And I think when I was writing the book, I was relating a lot to many cookbooks I have from my grandparents, etc. That have scribbles on them, that have traces of food or products on them, and that's what I hope will happen to Bethlehem. I mean, if I visit you guys in a year's time and I see your book without olive oil and tahina, I'd get upset. Don't put it on a coffee table and think it's a beautiful book. It's a book made to be cooked out of. And that was really the reasoning, because I think Palestinian cuisine is still very much underrepresented. And my dream is one day to hear people, on a corner side in New York discussing, oh, so what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Chinese, Italian, Indian, or Palestinian? We have to break the boundaries where people have historically either been afraid to call their cuisine Palestinian, or where people perceive Palestinian cuisine as something that's made for a community. I don't cook for a community. I cook for people. I cook for people across the world. You mentioned Aqab in London or Fauda in Bethlehem. My doors are open to everybody. Whatever your origin is, whatever your eating preferences are, whatever, like for a cook, the only thing I need to know is, are you vegan? Are you vegetarian? Are you a pescatarian? Or that is what I would take in consideration, but it stops there. And I think the book was a bit trying to get this message out. There's a variety of recipes that are faithful to Palestinian cuisine. So 70% of the recipes are vegetarian. A lot of them are vegan. And it's not because I adapted Palestinian food to those trends. It is the reality of how people eat. You, Nevine, yourself are of Egyptian origin, and you know how our markets work. It's the product that arrives on the market is what you will be cooking. And it could be a herb, it could be a bean, it could be something that's like for a very short season, and it's very much vegetable based.
Thank you, Fadi. I'm going to share the screen because I prepared a few slides of the gorgeous and stunning pictures of some of the dishes. Is everyone able to see the slide?
Yes, looks good.
Yeah, I stopped by I selected these because of course that's the aubergine grilled with tahini, but then this is the stuffed grape leaves with cheese, right? Which is a bit, I would say, unusual for me to see, but it is a different take um, to the grape leaves. It's gorgeous. I don't know if you want to say something about that, Fadi.
Both recipes are actually very symbolic of the Palestinian terroir. As you know, grape leaves are used a lot in our cuisine, but usually they're rolled, stuffed with rice, meat or no meat. And I enjoy doing these little molds of grape leaves. So here there's cheese, there's raisins, there's tomatoes, but in reality, you can adapt it to anything. You can stuff it with frika, you can stuff it with a different kind of cheese. A lot of the recipes, what I would like to see is for people to take them and make them into theirs. I mean, I think just looking at the people joining us, there's people from different parts. Um, make them local. Make them local in the sense, if you want to please me, use local produce rather than fly Palestinian cheese from Nablus to, let's say, Pittsburgh to make that, use the local product. I think that is very important. And the aubergine dish, for me, there's a side of that aubergine dish that is very inscribed in Bethlehem's locality. So we say that the best aubergines come from a village called Batir, which is south of Bethlehem. They do have a particular flavor and a particular shape in Batir, um, which can be discussed because, all villages like to say, I have the best olive oil and I have the best, etc. But the usage of tahina is something that's very present in our cuisine. And tahina is one of the things that has been sadly appropriated. I think we'll touch this a bit further on in the conversation, but you have to remember in the backdrop of any Palestinian cook, I dream to be a cook like as apolitical as an Italian chef or a French chef or whatever. But being Palestinian, all of a sudden, I have to justify why I'm using tahina and why I'm using this and why I pronounce hummus and I don't pronounce it in a different manner. And tahina is one of the ones that sadly has been appropriated. I see tahina on shelves across the world being called Israeli tahina. And tahniya comes from the Arabic verb yuthan, which means to grind. And it's grinding sesame to make this. The oldest tahniya presses are in Nablus and Jerusalem. And so for me, it's important that we celebrate this knowledge and this transmission of knowledge that's gone from generation to generation. And the recipe is very easy to do. I mean, it does look like, now looking at the picture, I'm like, wow, this actually looks very, very good. But it's not that complicated. You just have to roast aubergines, do your tahniya mix with a bit of garlic and a bit of lemon, drizzle it on top, and the rest is just basically herbs you're dumping on top, a bit of pomegranate seeds and pine nuts, and it works.
Thank you, Fadi. I'm going to move on to the next slide because I'd like you to tell us about the family stories, because you start with pictures of your family stories with your father. was pointing at your heritage, familial heritage. Also, images of, and I'll let you talk about that, right? About Jaffa land that your family used to own, but also about your Sido, your grandfather, and passports. So the cookbook is more than just recipes. It really tells the story of family, of being indigenous, of tell us about these stories and what you wanted to convey through your book.
There's many levels to that. One is I feel it's a very intimate book with the stories. I tell a lot of my family stories. The idea behind it was to actually set what I do in food in its real context. And the context is the transmission that I was lucky to receive from my grandparents, from my parents, which I still receive from my father and mother on a daily basis. I mean, my dad's the best wine critic I know, and my mother is the best cook I know. So, like, even though that's not what they do professionally, but having been privileged to have these people that have a passion, that's given me a context of being able to today create what I do. And I'm extremely grateful for that. And I thought it was important to tell those stories because, no chef exists in a void. We are a product of transmission, whether it's within our family structures or within the profession and the people we've worked with. The other side of it is, the book I started writing the book 2 years ago. So we have to remember it's within a context that today it's published after 9 months of genocide, but it wasn't written during the genocide. And already at the time, I was tired of being dehumanized. I am not a monkey that needs to prove I'm human. I am Palestinian. I'm proud Palestinian. I don't need to apologize for being Palestinian. If a title deed in the book rubs people the wrong way, well, too bad for them. My family was dispossessed in 1948 by a newly created state called Israel, where our land was stolen from us, because that is what, if I were in the US and I steal your house, Nevine, you would go to the police and report a theft. It's not me accusing the Israelis of something. It is de facto. I have that paper I have in my hand. I have something like 80 of them of different lands in Jaffa, in Jerusalem, in Ramla, in Lud, that were stolen from my family in 48 by the state of Israel. And I am not a refugee. So imagine the case of the refugees whose living home was stolen from them. And I think it's part of our story, just like, if you're a Japanese chef and you suffered the Kobe nuclear reactors breaking down, it would be part of your story because you had to run for your life. In our case, Palestinians, as soon as we start speaking about this, people don't want to hear this, or people want us to change the narrative. I am who I am. I was born in that family. I cannot put makeup on it to make it look nicer and not rub people off the wrong way. So I thought it was important that within telling that story, my grandparents on my father's side left Palestine in the 1920s, moved to Japan, lived in Kobe until 1943, where the Americans bombed Japan. They ran away, ended up in Bombay. My dad was born in Bombay. They came back in 1954 to the West Bank because the rest of Palestine had been occupied by Israel and Israel created on our land. They lost everything they owned. I grew up with a grandfather that never mentioned the lands that had gone. But the story was always there. I would see him tear up every time he saw an orange because his 120,000 square meters of orange groves were stolen. On my mother's side, my grandfather was born in Bethlehem, raised in France, came back in the early 40s. My grandmother was born in Bethlehem, raised in Bethlehem. In 1948, she, along with a group of women in Bethlehem, extremely courageous women, set up the Arab Women's Union, which was the first organized response to the Nakba, because there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of refugees coming into Bethlehem that needed medical care, that needed support. And my grandfather was a doctor, so he was in the operating room operating on these people. And she set up with her friends that first response type of women's group. The all of these are things that make me who I am, and I cannot not only I cannot, I don't want to. I mean, I'm just gonna link it to something else. Yesterday there was a preview of an interview that Christiana Amanpour did with me on for CNN. If you go to Twitter and look at the comments on that interview, I promise you, if I were not Palestinian, if I were of any other nationality, the people who are commenting would be pursued for calls of hatred, would be pursued for libel. People are writing things like, I am a supporter of Islamist terrorist movements. I've been somebody who's been very clear about I'm somebody that is pro non-violence all along my life. People are basically saying things like, oh, Palestinians don't exist, doubting that I was born in Bethlehem, doubting, this is not okay because that is racism in any other context. And I think since the 7th of October, and I'm very confused that my book is coming out now because it's a time where I'm not very much able to celebrate that book that took a lot of hard work, not only of me, but of a great publisher. My editor at Hardy Grant is a wonderful woman called Jenny Wopner, who herself is of Jewish origins, American Jewish. So it's beyond, and I'm saying her religion, and you know, Nevine, very well that I don't care about people's religions, but I'm saying it also to put a context that's clear. What is happening in Palestine today is beyond religion. And telling those stories, I'm hoping that I challenge people's perceptions, because people tend to want all of us to look like a bunch of terrorists, which we're not. I live in a house that's 70 years older than the state of Israel. That's where I live. The lower ground of my house is 400 years older than the state of Israel. So when somebody says, I don't exist, I'm a liar, I showed up from Saudi Arabia, that's not true. And the problem is we've given space to those voices that, again, if they were attacking any other community, that would not go unpunished and unaccountable for. So telling those stories, I don't want my book to be political. I want my book to be a book it's actually called Celebrating Palestinian Food. It is celebrating the great artisans in the book. It's celebrating my family heritage. It's celebrating every recipe that talks about the land, that talks about the produce. And it's going beyond what today people are trying to stick onto us, which is, one of the comments was attacking Christiana Amanpour and saying, why didn't you ask him about his position on the 7th of October? Why didn't any newscast ask any Israeli official about their position on 35,000 dead people? My position is clear. I am against violence. So whatever violence was perpetrated on the 7th of October by Hamas, or anything that's been done for 75 years by the government of Israel, I am against. But I shouldn't be the only one saying it. I'd like to see anybody interviewing Netanyahu ask him, do you condemn what you're doing? Like, come on, it's insane. And we're at a point where for a long time we were asked to humanize ourselves. But I see somebody of the participants here who's somebody Nevine, who I had the pleasure of sharing an oyster with in Pittsburgh, who's American Jewish, and that's how the world should be. That is how we should be. It shouldn't be about this person's origin is this person's origin is that. It's beyond. Today, what's happening, and I'm sorry, I'm not in the US, I have the privilege of talking about it, while you guys don't have the privilege of talking about it. What's happening on campuses is insane. What is happening in academia is insane. When, as professors, you're not allowed to speak your opinions, when students are being reprimanded for their positions. I come from the generation that grew up listening to Pink Floyd and reading Allen Ginsberg. I'm sorry, but it's in my blood. It's resistance and revolution is in my blood. I cannot see this repression, and it's not and it's not. And I've said it and I repeat it. It's not a football game. You're not taking sides. It's not you're pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. You're pro-humanity, and pro-humanity means the end of violence in all its shapes. It's not. If I don't talk about the hostages being able to go back home, it's because I'm Palestinian. 35,000 people of my people have been killed. It doesn't mean I don't want the hostages to go back home. I actually think the Israeli government should have accepted any deal to get everybody out alive and not wait now until 9 months later where they're retrieving bodies. I do think somebody, and I think the Americans should have, on day one, forced the Israelis to stop, forced Hamas to stop, because they have the power to stop both, and sent everybody back home alive. I'm sorry, I went onto my political rampage, but that's it. We've done politics. Can we go back to the book?
Yes, please.
No
This is
apology, though. No apology
no
necessary.
apology. I do want us to continue celebrating the book because there's another aspect that we definitely want to talk about. And as someone who had a chance to visit last year, had a chance to visit Palestine and several cities there, it was a space of peace, a space of communal bonding, of support. It was incredible. So I'm gonna transition to a few slides. And what I chose to do in those slides is show a picture from your book, and that's Nabil in Bethlehem, right down your house. And this is a picture we took of you picking the herbs from her.
When I had a bit more hair.
I'm sorry, I didn't notice that. And also the Nacho brothers, right? The butchers and the meat, the fresh meat. We had a chance to eat fresh liver, and it was amazing and healthy. And that's you, inside the freezer, bringing the meat and our students watching. I mean, you treat places like they're your own. There's so much support and bonding that you guys have in there. And this is the Arab Women Union, which you care to talk about a lot. And that's a local bakery, and that's an amazing photo, again, of local artisans. I had also pictures of Sebastia, because your book is not just about Bethlehem, but about the olive oil of Sebastia. Abu Muhammad, which we had a chance to meet also, his amazing business there and restaurant and food. And of course the Dead Sea and the salt factory. So tell us about the significance, Fadi, of why you wanted to include your community and the artisans and a recognition of their role in Palestinian life.
So, chefs are a funny breed. We like to make you believe that we've created everything. But in reality, we don't exist without all of these people. We don't exist without the Halak family who extract salt on the Dead Sea. We don't exist without Abu Muhammad and his olive oil. We don't exist without Nabil and her herbs. They're the ones that make food possible. They're the ones that work the land. They're the ones that practice crafts that allow us to have fantastic bread, as you've tasted in Bethlehem. The Nacha brothers have superb ethos to start with. They have an approach which is what our grandparents used to do. They use the whole animal. It counts. It makes a difference. If we look at the environmental disaster that industrial farming does, having the option of working with a butcher that, when I go into the butcher's shop at the end of the day and say, so what do you have left? The guy smiles at me and gets out a box this tiny. So yeah, I may have a bit of cartilage left because everything else has been used and sold. We have a responsibility as cooks. People who are home cooks have a responsibility on how we're treating the environment. You and Michal may remember the first time I cooked in Pittsburgh with you guys. When I saw some of the produce that were available, I was slightly horrified at the size of cucumbers in the US. I was horrified at the size of tomatoes that had been fed hormones and fertilizers and whatever. So it's part of the privilege of being able to cook in Palestine. and work with very small farmers. It's also something I'm trying to save, because if you look at more industrialized societies, we've gone through a cycle where the older markets have disappeared. For a very long time, it was only mass distribution. And then organic came back, but organic today is unaffordable to most people. We are still at a stage where we're a bit between the, I'd say, spontaneous farming that is organic very often, but it doesn't go through a certification and 6,000 stamps, and a bit of the mass distribution. And that's where we are in Palestine. And my fear is that we will go through the same cycle as the Americans, the British, the French, where we will end up being totally into a mass distributed food market, and then go back to organic where only a happy few can afford it. Today, the souk in Bethlehem is where people go to buy their vegetables, regardless of their purchasing power possibility. And that's something which is frightening. I mean, I just came back from the restaurant and I stopped at a shop on the way that is an organic shop that has fantastic product. Like every zucchini has a story, which is fantastic. At least I know where it's coming from. But the kilo of zucchini is at 35 pounds, which is $50. Mm, mm, that hurts. I didn't buy the zucchinis. I just had a look at the shop. I also checked where they were buying the chickpeas from. But it is frightful because it's a happy few that can afford this. While in Bethlehem, you'd get the same story for you attached to your zucchinis, and you'll know what soil they were planted on, and it'll be for like $2 the kilo or whatever, $1.50. That is important in how we cook. And for me in the book, it's a bit also this. I tell people the recipes in the book are made to be adapted. So there is a makluba, which is that flipped over dish with cauliflower in the book. But if you're cooking it out of season, please don't use cauliflower that's coming from 10,000 kilometers away. Use whatever vegetable you'll have available locally grown. I know, and I'm sorry for Pittsburgh, it gets pretty cold in winter, not much grows there. But you know what? Wait for your makluba and have it in March. Don't. We have to be, we're at a very critical point today where there are certain products that have become sexy and everybody wants them in their dishes. Black truffles, caviar, like the whole thing. But I don't want to have black truffles if I'm in a country where it's not being foraged there and then. I don't want to have oysters. I was in Dubai recently and everybody was trying to shove oysters down my mouth. And I said, no, no, no. And finally, I was at a friend's restaurant who's the only guy who has native oysters from Dubai, locally foraged, locally picked. And he was like, what's wrong with you? Why are you having so many oysters? I was like, well, simply because for the last 3 days, everybody was trying to give me these fantastic French oysters, and I didn't want them. We have to be conscious. And the book is a bit trying to do this. With fresh products, it matters. It really matters. It doesn't taste the same. I remember the wild goose chases you and Michal went on in Pittsburgh, and then Michal's mother came in as reinforcement to try and save us. And if you remember that discussion, the three of us had about one or two products we didn't have. And the discussion was, oh, where were we going to find them? And then the only address was this Indian-owned small grocery not far from campus. That's how people should think today. When I think, when you go into a supermarket and you see 5, 6, 10, 20 legs of lamb that are cut identical there in the fridge, take a minute and think what's happened to the rest of that lamb. In the book, there's a recipe of lamb testicles. People were outraged. And I was like, hey, come on, come to Palestine. You have that lamb hanging there, and they take all the offal, and all the offal is used. You mentioned you ate raw liver at that butcher's. Every single piece of the animal is eaten. It's the same with, and please, there's a frika recipe that has the tops of the carrots in it. Please, whenever you're shopping, don't buy carrots that have the tops cut off. buy the whole carrots and use the tops. They're delicious. Because if you're not buying them, they're being cut off and thrown away. They're not being used to create another meal somewhere else.
Nevine, do you mind if I comment here and break break in for a second? I loved everything that you just said, and I have a grocery here, and we used to actually for 8 years we had a cafe, and I always would use the carrot tops to make carrot top pesto arancine. But I just also wanted to say that everything you just said, and then also eating seasonally is one of the most beautiful community experiences that you can have. It's like we've moved away from that connection of eating together seasonally. It's when everybody is waiting for the ramps, and then the ramps come, and then everybody's cooking recipes and swapping recipes. There's like some, something that we've lost and now get to come back to. Can be that kind of sharing. Another brilliant reason to eat seasonally I've been lucky enough to experience, and also didn't really have that connection with food until I started using small farmers and having my connection with the farmers. So just wanted to say that.
If I may comment, Paige, on that, because that's an important, very important point. Last year, after having driven Nevine and Michal crazy trying to find things in Pittsburgh, I went on to Toronto, and I was lucky to cook with a chef in a community farm. And the people we that joined us for that cooking session thought they were coming to have a Palestinian meal that would be pre-cooked. And they showed up on the farm, and we were like, okay, you know what? Here are your baskets. You're going to go look for this and this and that across the farm, and you're going to cook it yourselves, which is also a bit of a lazy way for chefs to say, I'm not doing the work. Somebody else is going to be doing it. But it was fascinating to see people pick some of the herbs. I mean, most of the stuff we had already prepared. They just needed to finish them. But also, a lot of things they had to pick themselves. And by the end, when everybody sat down to eat, the experience was very different because of that sense of community. And community is not about our commonalities, it's just sharing that experience together. So it is beyond origin, ethnicity, faith, orientations, etc. It is that experience that makes us into that temporary community.
Totally.
I'm not going to go too much towards alternative thinking, but remember Hakim Bey and the temporary autonomous zones. I'm just saying.
I love it. I love it.
That's amazing. I think with the time left, we'll let our audience, people attending the meeting, ask Fadi questions as well. So you're welcome to unmute. Maybe raise your hands first, and then we can select who goes next. Ruth?
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, Fadi. First of all, congratulations on the book. It's gorgeous. I just ordered it. I cannot wait to just slowly begin to cook my way through it. I have one sort of light question and then one maybe a bit heavier question. The lighter question is, I completely agree with the cooking locally as much as possible, and that's something that I've been trying to do. And also, to be very frank, and thinking about supporting Palestinian farmers and Palestinian produce and olives in the United States. I guess just your thoughts on what it means for folks, not even in the diaspora, but just folks around the world to like deliberately seek out Palestinian products, particularly when, so often they are co-opted or slapped with like the label of Israeli, for example. And then to be very frank, if you have any recommendations for olive oil sellers who would ship to the United States, that's the first fun question. And the second question, which you are under no obligation to answer, but one thing that I personally have been struggling with, and I will say that, I am in a sense deeply ashamed that it took until after October 7th for me to really engage with and learn about cooking Palestinian food. Obviously had enjoyed it, but in terms of like learning the stories and regional histories, etc. And I will say there is a great sense of sadness that I have that we have the pleasure and joy of appreciating your book while so many people in Gaza are starving and unable. So, for example, like the Gaza Kitchen, I'm forgetting, I think it's Leila Ahmed who wrote a beautiful book. And it's heartbreaking because I'm reading this book and there's so many wonderful fish recipes because obviously it's Gaza, you have the sea, and yet Gazans themselves are not able to cook their own food. So I apologize. I'm like, really appreciate this talk, lots of feelings, but how you, as a chef who are yourself Palestinian in the West Bank, watching what is happening to your people, obviously in the West Bank, but also in Gaza, as a chef, how you have balanced that, because obviously like it is your birthright, as you said, and the land and all of that, and there's so much joy to be had in it. But I will say, like, there is a great sense of grief that I have. Like, I was making musa khan the other day, and I'm like, this is so delicious. And also like how when children are eating dog feed, like what right do I have in the United States to be enjoying this culinary legacy? Um, yes, sorry, that was a lot, but any or none of what you would like to answer that. But thank you so much for your beautiful book and for speaking with us. It's so appreciated.
Thank you, Ruth. It's very kind. I look, first, you shouldn't apologize for any of your questions. I enjoy answering all questions, including the very difficult ones. In the case of your question, so the easier one is, of course, source Palestinian when what you're sourcing is originally Palestinian. But don't source Palestinian just because it's Palestinian. I believe that we should apply the same rules across humanity. So if you're buying olives, yes, please do buy Palestinian olive oil. It's fantastic. And you'll find it online if you're cooking Palestinian with it. Already on a culinary side, I think olive oils, for example, match their own cuisines. The flavor profiles are very different. I can't say Palestinian olive oil is better than Italian olive oil or Spanish olive oil, but it depends how you're cooking with it and what you're cooking with it. Then, of course, you can have fun with. I mean, you don't want to see my test kitchen. Sometimes it looks more like a mad alchemist slab than anything else because I'm trying to, with olive oils, for example, I would be trying 20, 30 different olive oils on a dish, and seeing the flavors and how they marry. Buy Palestinian wine, buy Palestinian frika, definitely. But just don't buy because also we have a duty towards the producers, which is also to tell them when it's not great, because that's how they'll make great products, and that should be transparent. I know there's a lot of sentiment towards Palestinians now, and people will support in any way available. But I think we have to also support as good friends should, which is good friends are also the ones that sometimes tell you, hey, you're on the wrong track, or this is not okay. I've seen, sadly, on certain online presences, um, everything that's labeled Palestinian all of a sudden becomes very attractive. And it's like, not really. Let's be honest, we have a duty. Like, if I were a shopper at Paige's bookstore, um, she'd throw me out most probably because I'd complain and whine about everything. But it's not because I don't like Paige and her bookstore. It's because I actually want the bookstore to do better. Um, I'll compare it to a bookstore story. When the publisher sent me a list of the bookstores outside of the English language world that had ordered the book, one of them happened to be a bookstore in Paris that I have a lot of um, emotional attachment to. And at 4 a.m, I sent them this like enormous email saying how much it meant to me to have the book there. But then I also asked, but where are you going to display the book? And I had a conversation with the person who owns the bookstore after that about, you know what, it's not, and that person was being very supportive and said, you know, it's Palestinian. I wanted to be there in front. And it's like, no, it's not because it's Palestinian. Read the book. You may hate it. If you hate it, you can just dump it with every other cookbook. If you love it, then yes, please put it on the street and send me a picture of it. But I think that's important. And that's where we build real solidarity. It's when it's honest. On the subject of cooking and celebrating food, you know, until this genocide started, I always had hope. Nevine mentioned the trip they did last year, um, which was actually in very difficult times because it was just after the settlers had attacked Hawara. And we drove on a bus with the students through Hawara 3 days after the attack. And it hit me that for me it was normal. And for the professors and students from Carnegie Mellon, they were outraged at the fact that there was an Israeli soldier every 10 meters behind a cement block in a Palestinian town. And it conveyed for them a sense of fear, while I was like, business as usual. What happened after the 7th of October, I still don't have the tools to deal with it. So your question is really spot on, because I get confused every morning, every evening, every day of, should I go on talking about Palestinian food when people are, and if I may correct the word you used, people are not starving, they're being starved. They're man-made being starved by what people sadly call a democratic government, which is not a democratic government. It's a fascist state called Israel. When the Minister of Defense on the second day, on the 8th of October, said, we will starve them, we will not let in food, water, and fuel, and the world didn't say anything. Nobody opened their mouth. Not a single government opened their mouth. For me, it sent me to what I had learned about medieval ages. If you lay siege to a fortified town and you starve the people inside it until you crack the doors open, it's insane. It's insane that today in 2024, 8.5 months into it, we're seeing people being starved. We're seeing people attacking aid convoys. I mean, it is crazy. And that makes me very confused of, should I actually still be, you know, sharing the book and talking about food and actually even cooking? So to be very transparent, the first few weeks after the 7th of October, I couldn't cook. Every time I grabbed the pan, I remembered friends, family in Gaza, and I would crack down and not be able to cook anything. It doesn't mean I didn't eat, because I did eat like all of us, but I couldn't cook. I couldn't imagine the act of cooking. And it's actually Gaza that made me cook again, because the people I know in Gaza who I managed to get in touch with started saying things like, oh, you know, remember that coffee we had here, you know? And I was like, and I asked a friend in Gaza, and I said, like, what do you think I should do? And that friend said, what are you feeling? And I said, well, what I'm feeling is we're disappearing. He said, well, for the few years you have before you disappear, be very loud about food. And honestly, that's a feeling that hasn't left me. It's a feeling that's there. And it's not a feeling I appreciate even talking about. But this is the first time in my 46 years of life where I actually feel we are disappearing. Our farmers are disappearing, their lands are disappearing. The Gaza has, simply by being bombed, if we, in a magic trait of the luxury we have of having this discussion, imagine the amount of chemicals that have been bombed into Gaza just by, conventional bombing. I won't even go towards white phosphorus or not, because I'm not a military expert. But just the amount of bombing, Gaza will never ever grow any food for the next generation, at least. But what is also disappearing is every Palestinian winemaker across the country, and winemaking, the oldest winemaking in the world, was in Palestine. The oldest exported wine in the world came from Gaza. If we just let this sink in, it is horrendous. It is horrendous that the world is letting this happen. It is horrendous that the governments are letting this go on. But we are disagreeing. In the West Bank, the West Bank is every day the settler movement, every day the government is ongoing, encroaching more and more on Palestinian land, is limiting movement. And it's not, and I have to clarify this, it is not this right-wing government of Israel, because that's not true. Settlements have grown at a faster rate since the signature of the Oslo peace agreement. So at the same time that this peace agreement was being signed, the settler construction doubled and then tripled and then quadrupled. Today, there's nearly 1 million settlers in the West Bank. We're just below 1 billion by a few tens of thousands. When Oslo was signed, there was 500,000 settlers. So it is not something that's linked to that one specific government. It is a policy that wants us out of the slum. And that feels horrible, because, where are we going? And yeah, therefore, I have no claim of preserving Palestinian cuisine. That's not my job. It's your job. It's everybody who's cooking Palestinian, wherever you are in the world. It's the act of cooking Palestinian food that will preserve it. It's the act of sharing the stories of the vine leaves and of the Nabulsi cheese and whatever. Our impact as chefs is very limited, but it's you. It's every person, wherever they are. So Ruth, go on doing musakhan, do hummus, and do whatever recipes you want that are Palestinian, because you're preserving. I don't know where you are, in which city, but you're preserving it.
I'm in Brooklyn. Fadi, thank you so much for that thoughtful answer. I'll just say, what you said about the destruction of the land in Gaza, and like there won't be a strawberry season next year because everything has been taken. But God willing, strawberries will grow again in a free Palestine. And thank you so much again for the thoughtfulness of you. I'm getting a little weepy over here. I can see Paige is brushing away a few tears as well. But thank you so much. It's so appreciated.
Thank you, Ruth. If I may just add, because you're getting weepy, and you got me weepy. Look up Suhair Hamad, a Palestinian poet based in New York. She has written a poem during this genocide about spices, which we wrote. I mean, she wrote it while I was talking to her. And yeah, Gaza is known for a dish called sumakiya, which is based on the soaked sumac. And she manages in a very artful manner to replace the image of sumac's red with people's blood. And I read that poem when I do supper clubs in London, and I can't finish it usually. So my team has forbidden me of reading it, because they end up with having to console me for an hour. But it's the reality we're living, and we can't masquerade it.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you do include the sumakiya in the book, the recipe, no?
Not
I
yet.
think I saw it.
There is a vegetarian sumakiya somehow.
Thank you, Fadi and Ruth, for raising these important points. Ray?
Yes, good morning from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you, Paige, for hosting this. Thank you very much, Nevine, for inviting me. Great to see you. Thank you, Fadi. Sabah al-khair or Masa al-khair for you. My name is Ray Milham. I am also proud Palestinian Arab, but I have even one more, I call it the triple whammy ahead of Fadi, that I'm also Muslim. And Fadi is from the beloved Christian community. So he has a little bit less, my is like, I call it triple whammy. Palestinian Arab Muslim, it's like perfect target, for many, many many different people. Obviously, I'm just joking, but it's there's somewhat truth what's happening. in the world, unfortunately, and the racism and all that. I am not a political person, but I am actually an engineer and a high-tech person. Like all of us, from a humanity perspective, I have obviously many Jewish friends and many Israeli friends, and actually I managed a team in Israel about 15 years ago, and I was the second Arab American and probably the first Palestinian executive. I was at Motorola. I'll just tell you this, Fadi, and then I'll ask the question. Just bear with me for a minute because I have a point. And anyway, so it was really interesting because my mother was born also in Jaffa, although she's originally from Nablus. And my father, as you know, is from Halhul. That's the land of the grapes that Jesus drank the wine from these beautiful grapes, right? And long story short, just like Fadi's story, I've been here, I feel like I've been here for 100 years in America because I've seen the right wing and the left wing and the middle wing and whatever you call it. So I've been through all this stuff. So so I have a lot of, experience and traveled to over 100 countries and lived in 6 countries and all that good stuff. And I admire people like Fadi and obviously all the great work that Nevine does with her work at CMU and stuff. So my question really, Fadi, is the genocide is happening and it's really something really bad. And I do a presentation once a month to a lot of American friends, and I talk about the history from the Zionist movement all the way till now. And being on the ground, I go to Israel and Palestine once a year, so I'm aware of many, many things and stuff. The question really is a soft question and a little bit more difficult question, just like Ruth was asking. A soft question or simple question is regarding the Levant region, the influence of the Levant. And maybe one time we talked about it. I felt like the Syrian and the Palestinian cuisine are, with all due respect to the Lebanese and the Jordanians, but it's like one of these on the higher level, really, more diverse and stuff like that. But obviously influence from Turkey and Greece and many others. So that's the soft question. The hard question is, when I talk to my Israeli friends, I know, Michal, I've heard a lot of great things about you from Nevine. When I talk to some of my Israeli friends and they insist that hummus is, Israeli. And like you, I also explained to them, no, Habibi, hummus is hummus, to squash the peas and all that stuff. How do you address that? Like how do you? I mean, obviously, I address it in a polite, diplomatic manner and all that good stuff. So anyway, so that's a little bit more difficult question. So 1, Levant, and 2, about the appropriation, the Israeli Israeli system on the Palestinian. Thank you. Sorry for talking too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. So the Levant, I don't like the word Levant because the Levant is a French word that was used to talk about anything that was east of Rome. And east of Rome is a pretty big place. I don't like the word Mediterranean. I don't like the word Middle Eastern cuisine because they all erase the particularities of each food tradition. Now, Syrian, Palestinian, Jordanian, Lebanese, Egyptian, we can't forget Egyptian because Nevine's here, because Michal's here, Israeli, whatever, those regions, each one has particularities. And we'll come to the Israeli to answer your second question. But for the others, let's take the emblematic dish that the Egyptians claim is theirs, molokhia. They dump some rabbit in it. They think it's tasty. In Palestine, we use chicken or lamb. I do a vegetarian version of it. It's those dishes that we have in common, but with very particular differences also, with very particular locally inscribed differences in how we do it. Hummus is a great example. Hummus with or without garlic, hummus with cumin or without cumin, hummus with olive oil in the hummus itself or olive oil on top. And in terms of flavors, it's a whole different range. So I think, we have to remember that we were ruled for 400 years by the Ottomans. And like any empire, food travels within the empire. Give you an example. I have a friend who's today Israeli, but he's originally from Uruguay, and before that, his mother's from Izmir. And we once cooked a green bean stew. I cooked my grandmother's, and he cooked his mother's, and they were identical. Because now, did this dish really come from Izmir and was brought by an Ottoman official to Palestine? Or was it a dish cooked in Palestine that was taken by an Ottoman official to Izmir? I don't know. But there are commonalities. So I think what's happening today in the world of food in general, 20 years ago, you went out to eat Chinese. Today, you go out to eat Mandarin cuisine or Shanghai cuisine. People are becoming more aware of the terroirs, of the differences. Nobody, I mean, except for a few people who like to massacre their own palates, but nobody has sweet and sour pork that's made industrially and calls it Chinese. Or even worse, they used to call these restaurants Asian restaurants. Today, you know the difference between Cambodian cuisine and Vietnamese cuisine. There's really an awareness of food and its inscription in local heritage and transmission that's different. So, give you a basic example between Syrian and Palestinian, one dish, kebab. The kebab in Aleppo has sour cherries in it, or has mahlab, which is the seed of sour cherries in it, which is something in Palestine we've never used. So there are even differences like that. Now let's get to your big question. Appropriation. So there's a reality. What is the reality? 1948 creation of the State of Israel, populated by whom? Populated by Palestinian Jews. Those own hummus as much as you and me, and those are Palestinians like me, like you, with our different faiths. They're Palestinian. Populated by people who came from Europe. I'm sorry, if you're Polish, you don't own hummus. You can cook very good hummus. Just say it's Palestinian, but it's not yours. Just like I will never, I think I can do a very, very good pierogi, but I will never say Polish pierogies are Palestinian. I will recognize the Polish heritage of them. I may get told off by the Russians because the Russians also claim pierogies and that. But then there is the people of Jewish faith that were either brought or kicked out of Arab countries. And there we go into another discussion. Sephards or not Sephards, that's another long story. But to simplify it, if you were Jewish in Baghdad, you were Iraq. What you ate was not necessarily what Palestinians ate. You had a very rich cuisine that is Iraqi. There's actually, recently I came across these two young Iraqi Jewish cooks that have a fantastic page on Instagram, and I can't remember their name right now, where they're celebrating the long history of their Jewish community in Iraq with food that is Iraq. And why I said Sephards, and it's a long story because I know Michal and I had a long discussion about this. So the Sephards, who are the Sephards? Sephards were Jews living in Spain that were kicked out at the end of Andalus, basically. To make it simple, it wasn't that simple. It was a bit more complicated. But they ended up in North Africa, and North Africa already had an indigenous Jewish population. And those two populations, at a certain moment in 48, just before 48, after 48, some of them ended up in Palestine. Does it make shakshuka Israeli? Of course not. Shakshuka is Tunisian, and it'll stay Tunisian. What I say to people, my dream is to see a restaurant in Tel Aviv that says Palestinian food, where an Israeli chef will cook it and acknowledge that origin of this food. Just like years ago, the best sushi restaurant in the Middle East was crowned as a restaurant in Tel Aviv called Sakura at the time, and the chef was an Israeli. But he couldn't say sushi is Israeli. Come on, please. There's also a very colonial approach. When the town of Abu Ghosh, which is a town between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, started receiving its first Israeli customers buying hummus, it was a bit the Ashkenaz Israelis who were going to, I'm sure you've done it in the US. You go to Indian reservations and you feel like, oh, I'm finding out about the indigenous. You know, let's go on a course of what are those indigenous people. And the Arabs were some unknown, actually using the name Arabs to start with, not calling us Palestinians. It's like, and we have to remember within the Israeli society, there was already a rejection of Arabs, including the Arab Jews. So it's more like, I think of it now and I'm like, wow, it took 50 years for a very white European Ashkenaz colonial system to all of a sudden start wanting to celebrate Oriental stuff that they banned 50 years ago. 50 years ago in Israel, you ate schnitzel and you drank Maccabi beer. And all of a sudden now everybody's putting goddamn chickpeas in every recipe. And it's like, come on, guys, like, fine, I am with healing and I'm with the attachment. I'll give an example, Ray, that I gave when you were at that talk in Pittsburgh. Israelis call the ones that were born in Israel, first generation, sabra. In Arabic, sabr is the prickly pear. Let's think about this. 580 demolished villages in 48, where a lot of them, nothing was left, except the prickly pears, because the prickly pears grew again. And prickly pears were used a bit like a hedge between lands. Imagine that was appropriated, like that symbol of resilience was appropriated. And the Israelis give you this bullshit story of, oh, we're as hard as the prickly pear on the outside and as soft as it inside. Like, I'm sorry, I haven't seen soft Israelis for the last 8 months. Michal, I'm not including, I'm talking about the ones that still live there, that serve in the army. Not you. You are a soft Israeli. But it's crazy. It's crazy that our link to the land is being subjected to a narrative that wants to cut that link to the land. Za'atar is not Israeli. Frika is not Israeli. I have no problem seeing an Israeli chef using za'atar. Just acknowledge what it is. Acknowledge where it comes from. And that brings us to that colonial aspect of, how do you create a link to the land? You take over the food that the land gives you. Because there is no link. And I'm going to use, Nevine and Michal, you're sitting down. Imagine what I'm going to say. The non-believer. I'm going to say, I'm going to use a religious text and tell you a little story. Imagine, I'm quoting the Old Testament, guys. So for the ones who are not familiar with the logo of the Israeli Ministry of Tourism, the logo of the Israeli Ministry of Tourism is two people carrying a stick that has grapes on it. The biblical story is Moses sent 12 spies to the land of Canaan. And the 12 spies, 2 of them came back with a fruit that they didn't know, because at that time the Israelites were in the desert. And that fruit is Ray Milham's great-great-great-grandfather's grapes. So it's not me saying it. It's the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. Fast forward 3,000 years, Israeli winemakers claim that it's Rothschild who in 1951 brought grapes from France and planted them in that same land of Canaan. If I take you a bit further away, an Egyptian traveler, pharaonic times, travels to the land of Yah. The land of Yah was us. And he writes this text saying, the land of Yah was abundant. So I'm not quoting the original text, I don't know it by heart. But basically saying the land of Yah was abundant in grapes and figs. There was more wine than water. So that is an excellent example of appropriation. Imagine if the Israelis' narrative was that land had grapes. We stole the grapes and we're actually making good wine of them. It would make me at least, acknowledgement is a base at least of being able to have a discussion. There is no acknowledgement. There's never been an official acknowledgement by any Israeli politician of the Nakba. There's never been acknowledgement of the Naksa of 1967. There's never been an acknowledgement of our existence. We're called Arabim, the Arabs. I don't come from the Arabian Peninsula. I may have a bit of my DNA from the Arabian Peninsula. Look at Ray. I mean, Ray's far enough now, but if he gets closer to his camera, he looks more like a European or a Phoenician than a Saudi, with all respect to the Saudis and the Phoenicians. We are at that place in the world where there was a crossroad of all these tribes. I may have Israelite blood and Canaanite blood and Phoenician blood and a bit of Crusader blood at a certain moment. The Egyptians, the Queen of Sheba did come up from the Nile Delta to Jericho. She left quite a few people in that country. I may have a bit of Egyptian blood. This is who we are, and we should celebrate that diversity. But we should acknowledge it. We should acknowledge it. So yes, appropriation drives me crazy. I think we have to be, in the Israeli-Palestinian context, it drives me crazy, but it also drives me crazy in any food context, because it is not okay. Celebrate. We were earlier talking about buying local produce. You live in a country where the north of the country has a lot of sumac trees that were used by the indigenous Indians. Can I come as a Palestinian and say, oh, we're the only ones using sumac? Or the Persians say we're the only ones using sumac? That's not true. If I get lucky to be able to cook with North American sumac, I would acknowledge where it comes from. And I will not just put a label that's saying Palestinian on it. I will say I'm doing a Palestinian recipe using indigenous sumac to the Pittsburgh area or to, I think it's important. Today, if you go out to a restaurant, Ray, and you look at a menu, you will see very often at the end of the menu, at least reference to the farmers that have supplied the produce, or reference, very bizarrely, when it comes to Palestinian food, nobody says anything.
Wow. Can I comment just quickly, Nevine, on Paige, just quickly on the DNA, Fadi? Honestly, I did my 23andMe DNA, and I wanted to know where I am, where from, right? Palestinians, like to your point, were very mixed. My DNA came back, this is like 3 years ago, 40% Arabian, so that's from my father's side. 2,000 years ago, we have the family tree coming from Hijaz, Mecca and Medina. 20% European, to your point, whether that's Greek, Roman, Crusaders, God knows, because my late mother and the Abu Ghazali family from my mother's side are all, even the Milham, some of green eyes, blue eyes, lighter and so on. 20% North African. We have one of the descendants is Al-Idrisi, who was an Arab who spread Islam all the way to Morocco, and his son and grandson went to Andalusia to continue. That's one of my ancestors. 10% Eastern European, and the last 10% Ashkenazi Jewish. I swear to God. And I'm telling you that we are absolutely, some of our blood, the Palestinians, we are the natives of the land. Like you said, Fadi, we have the Greeks. We are probably the Israelites who were with Moses, mixed with the Canaanites, mixed with all kinds of civilizations that have been there. So when the European Zionist Jews came, 70, 100 years ago, in this name of settler colonial project called Israel, and they start killing us. They're killing the natives of the land. They're killing the real people of the Old Testament and New Testament, then the Quran. So it's like, even the DNA side, I fully agree with it. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
We can't get enough of this conversation and of listening to Fadi. I don't know if anybody else has a question for Fadi. I don't see any hands raised. So I'll just say something about the book. I want to say that when I say it's a gem, like feeling like I'm holding a gem, it really is. Like if you've attended the whole conversation we had, it's amazing recipes, Fadi's touches to the recipes, the story of Palestine, the story of Palestinian family, indigenous to the land, the story of the community, and it's really, really valuable. You can purchase it through the publisher's website. I don't know if I would pronounce it right. page would probably Archestratus, or sorry, I don't have it ready.
Yeah, I just put a link in the, oh, I just sent it to only you, Nevine. Hold on. I just put a link in the chat. It's Archestratus, or it's however you want to pronounce it. But I say Archestratus.
Yeah, and in other bookstores, but I highly recommend it, of course. I don't know, Fadi, if you have any final thoughts to share before we end the meeting, but it was a true, true pleasure to listen to you. And again, we can't get enough of listening to you. And we can't wait to invite you again to CMU and to talk to our students.
Thank you. Well, CMU will talk about that once you solve your student issues in the US. I don't want to be used as a reason for either side to get too angry at things. How about that? But I would love to come back to CMU, definitely. My final thoughts are just cook Palestinian, cook Palestinian, cook Palestinian, decomplexed without, Ruth gave us a very deep meaning to it. But, cooking is, before being a militant act, is an act of love. And I'm not saying it me, I'm stealing it from one of the greatest chefs ever, Massimo Bottura, who calls it an act of love, and he's right. Cooking is an act of love. It's an act of cooking for people you care about. For us chefs, it's either we just cook for all of you, so we just love you or not, but we cook, we feed you. But when you cook at home, it's really an act that is full of love. Just like I see that the voices today on the streets and on the campuses are voices of love, calling for humanity, calling for humanity to stand up. And yeah, I have never seen the bookstore, but with the little discussion we've had, I think, Paige, I can already imagine half of how you choose the books that are on those shelves. So yeah, please, if you're in proximity of the bookstore, not only buy my book, but maybe you all need a bit of a reminder. Not you guys, because you guys are, but the others need a reminder. So please read Lawrence Ferlinghetti, read Allen Ginsberg. Remember where you guys come from. Remember how you can be professors at universities today, thanks to whom. Remember how you can be students, thanks to whom. And I'm not talking about Carnegie Mellon because you are more like science oriented. I come from the French messy education system where we revolt, we challenge, we critique. And it is not innocent that your beatnik generation all ran away to Paris and slept on the second floor of Shakespeare & Co., where George Whitman put them in, but then they came back to the US. It's not innocent that all of their books were banned. I come from that thinking background. It's important today we remember it. It's important today that you actually, because we mentioned Israel and Judaism, it's important that you read what Allen Ginsberg wrote about his only trip to Israel, where he predicted the end of the world practically, of, what is this insanity? It is important, and Michal, I'm going to steal the question you asked me on tape at CMU, where Michal asked me, they were working on I can't reveal much, I don't know at what stage you are, but basically they were working on documenting part of the trip, etc. And she asked me when I was in Pittsburgh, what would you advise American Jews to act vis-a-vis Israeli policies? And my answer is an answer I believe in, and I think today it's even more important to repeat it. I don't see American Jews. I see American citizens. Your faith, whatever it is, Ray is an American citizen and Michal is an American citizen. Nevine, I don't know how they gave her the citizenship. I think that she should go back to Egypt. But in the other case, I'm teasing you, Nevine, is an American citizen. That's what I see with the beauty of your origins, but I don't see faith. And I think today, the most courageous people are the people that are standing in those streets and on those campuses challenging that perception that what our faiths are, what our origins are, should dictate our political stances, because they shouldn't. there's only one political stance to have right now, and it's pro-humanity. And I think there's great people. I don't need to name them. You know all of them, but I have a soft spot for the Mate family. So please listen to Gabor Mate and listen to Daniel and listen to people who are saying not in our name because it's important. Listen to the Palestinians that are saying, we just want to live like you guys. We don't want to live better than you guys. We just want to be able to move around and live like you guys are living. And I'll finish there because if not, I can speak for 10 hours and I'll bore you to death. Thank
It's
you.
amazing.
Thank you very much.
And cook Palestinian food and visit our coop and eat Palestinian dishes there. And when things open, the cities open, visit Palestine and Bethlehem and all the amazing cities.
Yes, please. I intend to see you in a few years' time. Find you guys in the streets of Bethlehem with this book in your hand, looking for Nabil and the Nacha brothers and driving up to Sebastian and eating musakhan at Abu Muhammad. Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
so
guys.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fadi. Thank you, Nevine. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you,
Nice to
everybody.
meet you all. Thank you. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
All right.
Bye-bye. مع السلامة. Bye-bye.
Like I keep it on
Bye.
my wish list to see if spots are.